Hey guys, this is Comic Uno, and today I'm doing top 10 Kickstarters of the month, one of my favorite videos to do for every month. And let's get started. I actually have two friends who launched Kickstarters before I get into the top 10, because I didn't want to be biased, but I do want to mention these Kickstarters. So first up is Pat Chan's Kickstarter, Vampire Emmy and Garbage Girl. If you're a fan of romance and horror, well, you get them both in this one, where Vampire Girl, or Vampire Emmy, falls in love with Garbage Girl, and it's a cool combination of genres here. Really good artwork, genres I really enjoy for comics, so definitely pick up this one. Moving on to one of my really good friends, Phil, who's launching Haunting Issue 2, and this book is also perfect for the Halloween season, where we get to see Bram is a character who has ghosts follow him, and he really does not like this part of his life, and he brings some other characters along for the ride, and one of those characters are Faith. So this is definitely a focus on both Faith and Bram as characters, and seeing a bit of their relationship develop. So check out this book. It's a lot of fun. It's really character driven, and if you like ghosts, and I feel like stories we don't actually get enough of are of ghosts, definitely go check out this one and support both my friends here. Now moving on to the top 10 list here. So number 10 for me is Killtopia issue 3. I just thought this was an interesting genre to explore in comics. So we have cyberpunk in Tokyo, but what's cool is that it has a very anime feel to it. So it's these bounty hunters fighting for mechas. I mean, there's already so many different genres and ideas that you would find in anime in a comic, and even the artwork and the vibe of it is very anime-ish, and I always like seeing that combined in the comic book genre, and maybe seeing a manga influence in comics is always interesting to me. So that is number 10 for me. Moving on to number 9 is UltraMax, and this is a 90-page graphic novel, I believe. And this just had a really interesting premise, and kind of puts something that we've seen before on its side. So instead of the villains being defeated, we get to see the hero is defeated. He is killed, and what happens after a superhero is killed, and do these people go to jail? How do they not go to jail? Do they work with the feds to not go to jail or lessen their time? And that's kind of what the story is here. Really interesting, different lens on the superhero / supervillain genre. And that's number 9 for me. Moving on to number 8, which is from actually a big creator in comics, and that is Kyle Higgins, and also an NFL player, Lance Briggs, The Trap. And why I put this on this list is that, I think it's interesting to see, again, two prolific people in their careers hopefully bring some love to comics, or I should say hopefully bring people that aren't usually into the genre come to the genre. And I always think that's great with these Kickstarter projects. And and also it was cool to see some of the themes they were going through. So it's like a sci-fi adventure, but they also have sports, of course, involved, and also social injustice that's explored as well. So there's a lot of interesting topics that, again, I hope that new readers, and maybe people that don't read comics and people that do love comics, could come together and read this book. So that is number 8 for me. Moving on to number 7. And number 7 for me is Death Tally. And this just had a really interesting premise. And the premise is that this girl killed the Grim Reaper. So what happens there? What happens when you kill death? We have so many stories like Final Destination, when you escape death, and maybe even like more cartoony versions of like Billy and Maddie, I think that show was called, on Cartoon Network. So it's kind of just a really interesting, different point of view on a very old concept and old story point of how about if you killed death? Like, that's crazy. So giving that one number 7. Moving on to number 6, which honestly the thumbnail really got me for this one, and that's Midnight Highway. And if you're into Twilight Zone, that's kind of the vibe it's going for, and it's always cool to kind of get those anthologies, especially for the time of Halloween, and a new modern twist on old concept like the Twilight Zone. And it's about this boy who goes on the highway, and there's a lot of interesting things that happen there, and of course a lot of horror aspects, and it's just kind of that cool premise where anything can happen, you know, kind of like, I forget the name of the story, but the hitchhiker type story, like what happens on this lonely road. So yeah, and the artwork looked really good too, and definitely up my alley, especially the coloring. Like I said, the thumbnail is really what got me for this one. Moving on to number 5, which is Miskatonic, I don't think I pronounced that right, Miskatonic High and Lovecraft P.I. And I'll just call it High for now. The high school story, we've actually seen a lot of Kickstarters for. It's been doing super well on Kickstarter, and I actually am not familiar with Lovecraft P.I., so it's cool. Maybe if you're a fan of Lovecraft P.I., it'll bring you to the high school story, and if you're a fan of the high school story, it'll bring you to Lovecraft, and that's what I love about crossovers on Kickstarter. And what's cool about this one too is that Lovecraft is more of an adult character dealing with the topic of Lovecraft, and then the high school story is also dealing with the topic of Lovecraft through a high school lens, and we're seeing those combine, and I just thought that was a really cool concept. And yeah, like I said, it brings two properties together, and something that, you know, you might really love from Marvel, where franchises come together, or DC, and we're seeing this from an indie perspective. So that is number 5 for the list. Number 4 for me is Spectrum, issue 2. This is a LGBTQ superhero book, and it's a team of all LGBTQ characters, and I thought that was really cool. You know, in a medium, every medium really, where we need more representation, to have a full team of LGBTQ characters, I thought was a really cool concept, especially in the superhero genre. So that is number 4 for me. Moving on to number 3, which is The Wild Cosmos, and this had a really interesting plot where we get to see a space smuggler have to smuggle a magical girl to save her crew. That was just like a crazy concept to me, especially kind of going into, I feel like it was two very different genres coming together, because you kind of have this space pirate story and then magical girls. Like, how does that come together, and how is that going to cross paths? And that really brought my interest. So that's number 3 for me. Moving on to number 2, and I feel like this is just such a concept that truly lives on Kickstarter, and why I love Kickstarter as a platform that creates comics, or I guess distribute comics, and crowdfund comics. But yeah, this is hard to pronounce, but it's Trivilt. So it's spelled TRVE, and then the next word is KVLT. So this one is described to be a heavy metal fast food crime comic. Man, that's so many interesting things in one. You got heavy metal, which is always cool to see, like, musical influence in comics. And then you have, like, fast food, like, in crime. Like, how's that all go together? And it somehow feels like it like, how has it not go together? How hasn't it happened before? So yeah, just like a really cool concept. And I'm excited to see, like, the vibe of that comic and the look of that comic especially. So that's number 2. Number 1 for me is just something that was just completely up my alley. Right when I saw it, I'm like, I'm backing this project. And that is Damsel from Distress. And it's with the dots, so it is actually a spy story. So it's this character that usually would be a damsel in distress who is pretending to be a damsel in distress to be a spy. I'm like, that's awesome. And then it's also really cartoony, which is cool. So it kind of feels like a Saturday morning cartoon. I'm like, this is so up my alley. I am so excited to read this one. So yeah, go check that out. I just thought it was a concept, again, that kind of felt so obvious. I'm like, oh, how hasn't it been done before? And now it is being done, and it just looks so awesome. And I love just the different ideas that they're bringing to this one, and looking forward to reading it. So that is my number 1 pick. Let me know in the comments below, what Kickstarters are you backing up? What Kickstarters did I miss this month, if you are supporting them? But yes, these are my favorites of this month. So go check those Kickstarters out, and please support the creators. But definitely follow me on Twitter and Facebook. Go check out my comics like Father Like Daughter and They Call Her Dancer. And every Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time is Comic Book Weekly, where we discuss our favorite comics and comic book news on our comic book podcast. Thanks, guys. Bye.